What is up, guys? You got Not the Worst here, bringing another Black Desert online video, and today we are taking a look at the Dracania Awakening PvE guide. We're going to be going through what skills you're going to need for this, the add-ons, and the skill rotation for it, covering a couple other finer things that are actually pretty important to being able to maximize the PvE on Awakened Dracania. She's gotten kind of a bad rap since release, did see some damage buffs on her, and wanted to hold off on making this video until we kind of see her settled in. She's actually very, very strong in PvE, but it takes a bit more setup and a little more thinking as far as what you're actually doing with her than your standard class in PvE. Overall, she's probably in the bottom A tier or so, thereabouts, in PvE when actually maximized. There's a lot of people running around that early on everyone's like, well, the Dragon Blood form is where all the damage comes out of, and Hexblood is pre-buffs only, and that's actually incredibly incorrect. The DPS on Hexblood is actually a lot higher. Most skills out of Hexblood are higher damage per second than every Dragon Blood skill except for Sundering Roar out of Dragon Blood. Obviously that one lasts a long time and deals really good damage while it's up, but a lot of other skills, if used properly out of Hexblood, deal more damage per second than you're doing, because there's a lot of slow skills in Dragon Blood, and even if they hit fairly hard, some of the hits aren't worth using. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump on over. First thing we're going to look at is going to be the skills that you're going to need. Okay, so let's take a look at what skills we need to use Dracania to the best of her ability within a PvE setup. So first of all, as far as absolute lowest raw skill points that you need to be able to do this, it's going to be 1260, which is not a ton of skill points. More is going to be, of course, helpful because you'll have access to some other skills if you run into a situation where your DPS is low and maybe you want to fill in with some other things, you'll be able to, but this is kind of the bare minimum for what you need. The skill rotation we're going to use is built so that you can rotate it completely from start to finish without having cooldown gaps in between, and also maximizes the amount of damage you're doing during that time. So as far as with our Robums, or the Robum skills, we're only really concerned about one that's going to matter in PvE, and that's going to only require just a few skills. We actually don't need that one, so that shouldn't be in there. It's just going to require a few skills in here that we need. So you need to have Markethan's Breath up to the third dot there, so Markethan's Breath 3, and you're going to need to have Abyssal Fang 4. That's going to give us access to Abyssal Advance, which you may use in a pinch. Number one, it switches you out of Awakening to Pre-Awakening. It's pretty much the only time you'll do it. And number two, gives you a nice critical hit rate buff, which is really important on this class. 24% critical hit rate is really nice for 15 seconds. You will see a damage increase since your Hexblood skills don't have maxed out crit, whereas the Dragon Bloods do. That does help quite a bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. Other than that, it's just going to be your passives. Obviously, you need Refraction and Dragon Walk. Any of your passive skills, you want to max that out. We don't really care about anything else. I do have this including maxing out Markethan's Scale. Two reasons. One, this can be really nice if you're in a pinch. Let's say you're low HP while you're grinding or something's going on. You can just go ahead and hit your... You can go ahead and hit your Abyssal Advance, recover some HP off that, get a couple buffs, and then you could, since it'll put you in Pre-Awakening, you can immediately shift Q as well, get your PA up, restore some more HP, and then some damage reduction, of course, while you're using it. So a quick swap, just kind of in a pinch if you need it. Do you have to have this? No, but just kind of nice to have, especially when we're talking about 12 to 1300 skill points being such a low requirement as far as being able to use it. Other than that, this class is pretty much strictly in Awakening. It doesn't like to go into Pre-Awakening for a couple of reasons. Number one, the damage output is going to slow you down. And number two, it doesn't have any switch back into Awakening other than actually using your C-swap, which, as you can imagine, DPS-wise, a C-swap is not where you want to be. It's going to do nothing for you. So we want to avoid that when possible, just using that swap if we need it in a pinch, and we're going to see swap out if we have that Abyssal Advance buff up and we want to move back in. So we're going to learn all of our main skills for it. That kind of goes without saying: Burning Resolve, Fate Beckons, Training, Impale, Dragonflight, Legacy, the Elvia skills, whatever, right? If you're grinding Elvia, it matters. If you're not, then it doesn't. As far as what skills need to be spec'd into, I think it's a little easier to say what not to spec into. We only need Savage Decree up to 2. We're not going to use this skill, but giving us 2 gives us access to Concealed Claw, which we are going to use. For PvE purposes of this skill rotation, we only need Aerial Burst maxed out. We're not going to use Flow Obliterate reiterate. A lot of times you'll have this learned and then maybe lock it and use it in certain situations, but in this skill rotation, we're not using that at all. So just aerial burst to 3, or you can learn this as well and then lock it. It does require more skill points that way. We're not using Storm Piercer. We're not using Crackling Flame out of the Hexblood stance. And then in the Dragonblood stance, we only need Spiteful Soul up to 3, which gives us access to the Flow Cloud Strife. We will be using the Flow off of Tip of the Scale, but we will, we have a cancel that we're going to use for it, but we'll get to that in a minute. So we do want the Cloud Strife. We're not using Storm Piercer. We're also not using Crackling Flame. Everything else in here we are going to use. As far as the Bond skill or the core skill that you want to use, I like to use Sundering Roar, Hexblood Sundering Roar, to give it super armor. A couple of reasons for that. We're going to be talking about endgame grinding, Gyfin, Hex, Sanctuary, places like that where you're taking a lot of damage in a lot of places. That extra super armor for it is really important. And also, just so you know, Sundering Roar is the highest, Hexblood Sundering Roar is the highest DPS skill that Dracania actually has access to. And if you maximize your crit, this thing hits super, super hard. Like super hard. So this is a really important skill to be using, and the cooldown is not that big a deal. And because of where we're using our Dragon Walk and Refractions, we're going to be hitting back attack with this every single time. So I like to put super armor with this. Just give me a little bit more protection there. I can get a little greedy. If you wanted to use something else, you could. Tectonic Slam's not terrible. Aerial Burst isn't terrible to use in like a PvP situation. If you're grinding Arch or something like that, that's probably where you want to be. But for me, I like to go with Sundering Roar. It's not the end-all, be-all. So that's what your skill build is going to look like at an absolute bare minimum. Obviously, you have more skill points. You can just go ahead and learn whatever, and it's not going to matter, but we're not going to be using these, so it's just fill-in at that point. If you want to have some stuff from Pre-Awakening for other purposes, PvP-wise and stuff, I do see that happen. Obviously, that's something you may want to look at, but for PvE, we're not worried about it. The other thing I want to talk about before we move into the skill rotation for it, this class actually kind of suffers from not having maximum crit on a lot of skills and having access to increasing that crit. Having that Abyssal Advance skill is really nice for that extra crit buff. This is really, really sweet. However, as you can see, it's kind of slow, so we don't want to be in a position where we're kind of forcing that every single time. It's slowing us down. We're going to use that in situations where maybe if you're grinding Gyfin, you're waiting on the wake up animation of the mobs, you could certainly throw it in there to pick up the extra crit. That's going to help. Or pack to pack, you have some kind of slight over clear movement. Maybe you're at Hex and you have the boss buff up and you've cleared a little bit fast. Maybe just tap that guy. It takes a second or so to cast it, and then maybe your mobs are back up from there. So just kind of play heads up with it. What we're really looking for that's important, and I don't really talk about in the DK PvE guides because it's not as important for it, is the Lightstone combo that we're using. This class absolutely has to have the Deathblow Lightstone setup. It is Blade, Predation. The bonus from it's 10% critical hit rate, and then when you add up the 2% from each Blade Stone on it, we're getting a 14% critical hit rate. Now, let me emphasize, that's critical hit rate, not critical hit damage. The reason we want this is we need those Hexblood skills to be hitting as hard as humanly possible, which means we need them to get maximum crit. If you have your tier 3 add-ons up, which is a little bit tricky because your tier 3 add-ons are coming out of Dragonblood, so it's either going to be a Sundering Roar or it's going to be Doombringer. That critical hit plus tier 3 add-on is 30%, which is really nice, but it's going to get most of your Hexblood skills if they're at 50% and you have your crit maxed out like you should as far as your crit stats. You're going to be at 98% crit rate, which is nice, but not all of them are 50%. Some of these are going to be at 78 and 88% as well, and you're going to run into instances where you just can't maintain that critical hit up, that 30% critical hit rate 100% of the time. So you're going to want to probably build this off of a 20% critical hit rate, which means that 98% on the 50% PvE crit rate skills is now 88%. This Lightstone set means they're 100% regardless, and it frees up that 30% critical hit rate slot from the tier 3 and makes it a little less stressful to smash Doombringer every single time it's on cooldown, which kind of can mess up your rotation if you're trying to go from start to finish and cycle it back around. So this gives us that breathing room. It's going to maximize our critical hit rate. Anything that's going to be 50% PvE critical hit rate not only is going to be 100% critical hit rate, it's going to be 100% critical hit rate on a tier 2 critical hit rate add-on, which is great because guess what Hexblood skills are? Tier 2, exactly. So we're going to have maximum crit on anything 50%. The stuff that's down in the 30s and 40s are going to get there anytime we have the tier 3 up. So this is just an absolute necessity. I've tested thoroughly. Even if you're at a spot where you can run what is it called? The wilds. Like I'm standing at Gyphon right now. If I do the wilds for Kama Sylvia damage, let's say I'm on my Suck DK, I'm going to run the wilds over Deathblow all day. But if I'm at Hex, there's not a plus 30 monster damage for that subtype since they're animal type. So I'll just run Deathblow, maximize the crit there, pick up some extra damage on things like Wheel of Fortune. Awakened Dracania doesn't have that luxury. It's actually going to be pretty noticeable. If you were to swap out to the wilds for a set versus the Deathblow set, you will see a huge performance difference. This class absolutely wants Deathblow at all times while you're PvEing. This is going to become a little bit difficult if you're on Arsha, because you typically don't want to be running a PvE set on Arsha, so you may need to be a little bit heads up about what you're running there, because it's not going to be ideal. But yeah, it's 100% necessary if you want to maximize the PvE. So with the Lightstone covered and the skill build, let's go ahead and take a look at the skill rotation, and then we'll do add-ons last to kind of talk about how that's going to work with the skill rotation. All right, so let's talk skill rotation here. I'm going to go through each of the skills individually, and then we'll go over the skill, and then at the end of the video, you'll see some example of me just actually grinding so that you can see how it works. So to start off, we're going to lead with Storm Maul, which is your WRMB skill. I'm going to go ahead and put the full rotation on the screen if you want to see it now, and then we'll talk about each section for it. Doesn't matter if you're currently in Dragon Blood or Hex Blood form, since this will swap you into Hex Blood regardless. Covers a lot of distance. It's an iframe. The damage is kind of whatever from here, and you're immediately going to either Dragon Walk or Refraction right after that hit lands. The reason for that is because the next skill that we're using is Aerial Burst. We are not using Obliterate for this, and we want to get a cancel on the Aerial Burst. If you use that skill by itself, it has a 2-hit like that, which is okay, but we want to be a little quick with what we're doing here, because we're trying to maximize the number of hits on our high damaging skills and not just using skills for multiple hits because they have them. So we'll do that. We'll immediately Dragon Walk it, and then you see that hit just as the second hit. We get the last hit off of the Aerial Burst right away, which is great. When we do a second hit off of Aerial Burst, we can immediately go into Tip of the Scale, which we do really only want for the accuracy buff off of it. It's really not good DPS outside of getting the accuracy buff, which can be really important, especially at a place like Hex. Not so much at Gyphon if you're a higher geared, but we want to at least pick it up, and we're going to be able to cancel it into its third hit. It has a total of 5. We're going to just get that third hit since we're using the second hit of Aerial Burst to go into it. So you're going to see we have a couple of quick cancels with these as far as which skills are being used fast until we get into our Tectonic Slam, Spiteful Slow from there. So we're going to do it again. Storm Wall, move to the side, hit that real quick, and then, hold on, we have a BSR. Let's get the BS. Let me lock BSR here. Okay, so we're going to Storm Maul, we're going to Dragon Walk it, Aerial Burst, and then we're going to do a quick Tip of the Scale into Tectonic Slam. Those are all going to flow real fast. Okay, there you go. So you're not going to dash with the Tectonic Slam since it has collision, and you'll be directly on top of the mobs. As soon as you use the Tectonic Slam where you're hitting the mobs, right after that we're going to go into our Spiteful Soul, and we're going to use that all the way through the flow, okay? And you'll note the flow's not protected, so keep that in mind. The startup for it is we're going to flow that Concealed Claw. Really nice damage on that chain in general. Then the next part that we want to do is get our Sundering Roar, the Hexblood Sundering Roar in. You want to be a little bit heads up about where your mobs are here, because you definitely want this to hit for a back attack for sure. Again, I have super armor on it, which I do highly recommend, especially starting out, that you put on it, but you don't have to. But make sure your positioning makes sense. If the mobs are still facing the other way from it, which they might be depending on where you're grinding after you do this, you might go straight into it. If they're not, your Dragon Walk or Refraction or the other one, they're going to be off cooldown from when we first used it for the Aerial Burst cancel, so you'll be able to use it from then. So then I'm going to throw this guy in, and then let's say I want to get behind him, and then boom. Throw my Sundering Roar in there. You will see Sundering Roar hits incredibly hard, especially on a back attack. So next up is kind of straightforward. You see this in most combos. We're going to go Doombringer, Savage Decree into Sundering Roar with the flow. The Doombringer is going to position us. We can move our camera, so it's going to position us wherever we need to be for the mobs. Savage Decree, Sundering Roar. We actually probably want to position ourselves from the coming out of the Savage Decree, probably throw a D-Walker Refraction in at that point, because it'll cancel that Super Armor startup animation of the Sundering Roar, which can be kind of nice, but pressing it immediately after Savage Decree will also give you a cancel on it. So again, this is going to be something where you just want to pay attention to where are the mobs and what are they doing. See how I go directly into the Sundering Roar there? So yeah, if the mobs have turned, which they probably have, you want to just throw a quick D-walk in. It's really important that you get back attack on that Sundering Roar, because we do have, you'll see in the add-ons, we have back attack damage plus 5% on it, along with critical hit damage, so that Sundering Roar is going to hit like an absolute freight train, provided you position yourself correctly. That's really important. After the Sundering Roar, since it's pretty long, what we're going to do here is we're actually going to D-walk or Refraction, and it's kind of important that you do this because we're going to use Tip of the Scale and Dragon Blood, and the first hit is not great DPS, but the last hit is amazing, and it also gives us a flow into our Cloud Strife as well. So if we were to do all three, not to say that you couldn't, but you don't need it and your DPS is lower if you add that first hit, it's literally better to Dragon Walk it and then last hit flow it. So the full one looks like this. Right, so you have those 2 hits, and then you can LMB, RMB to go into the flow. We don't want to do that. We're going to D-walk, again, since we're coming off the back of a Sundering Roar. If the mobs have not turned around after that very lengthy Sundering Roar with flow, then I have no clue where you're grinding, because they should have. So we're going to D-walk it, and then I'm going to boom, and then I'm going to go ahead and LMB, RMB to get that flow. Remember I mentioned before we were going to pick up Cloud Strife only, and we don't care so much about the Spiteful Soul. That's because on that last hit of Tip of the Scale and Dragon Blood, if you tap your RMB along with that LMB, you can actually use Cloud Strife. So we're canceling that first hit with our D-walk, and then we're going to hit real hard with that guy. Okay? And then just last is going to be our Tectonic Slam SE. Very strong skill. Really good damage. Nice enough animation. Fast enough for Dragon Blood. So that finishes us up from there. And guess what's happened at that point? Every single one of our skills are back off cooldown so that it can be used in a perfect skill rotation. There you go. And we're all the way back around. You can flow that all the way without any issue. And then just like I said, make sure you're being heads up about where your mobs are, so that you can make sure that you have good distance from them, and you're getting your back attacks as well. You may run into some situations, usually when you're using your E buff, or in a lot of cases you have your Z buff up pretty constantly, especially if you have some Tongue Grad items, you'll see that hit a lot. What's going to happen is your Sundering Roar is going to be on cooldown with the Dragon Blood version when you get there out of Doombringer. You may find that happens to you every other rotation. There's a lot of things that factor into that FPS mate, just a little bit how fast you're getting to it, but mostly your other attack speed buffs are going to play a part in that. So it's likely you find that it's not available each rotation. What you're going to do to circumvent that is you're going to make sure you have the flow to it hotkeyed to something, and you can actually just use the flow. Obviously, we want Sundering Roar, but we can't have it up every single time if we're going through pretty quickly on attack speed, so we would just skip over that. If that were the case, you're just going to Doombringer and then immediately use the hotkeyed flow and then just continue on from there. Okay, so you would then have Sundering Roar every other skill rotation when you get through those Dragon Blood moments. It's a little sad because it's really big damage, but we have to manage with an 18-second cooldown, and we still want to keep our DPS up as high as possible while it's there. So just keep that in mind, especially when that E buff is up. You're going to see that happens constantly, or if you're like me and you have a few Tongue Grad items, you tend to have Z buff pretty much almost all the time. It's back up by the time you've cleared the time frame for it. So there you go. That's how that works. You can chain that together. Get used to paying attention to your Sundering Roar cooldown, so you know when to use the flow hotkey instead of that, because you want to stay on top of that, and really just make sure you're positioning the mobs importantly, so that you're hitting them as effectively as possible. Back attacks are actually a huge deal, since this class, when critting properly, because we're using our Death Blow set, does actually hit really, really hard. So lastly, let's go ahead and take a look at the skill add-ons, and we'll see how those chain in along with the skill rotation. Okay, so here are our skill add-ons, and as I always say when I do these PvE guide videos, this is not the end-all be-all to skill add-ons. I sometimes tweak them over time or change things up just a little bit, but ideally your skill add-ons need to go hand-in-hand with a skill rotation. What does that mean? That means if you want to modify these, think about what skills you're using when you do modify your skill add-ons for what suits you, and because you might want to change up the skill rotation a bit to fit that. They should always work together with it. You're managing which buffs you're picking up on certain skills, so if you change what you're using at certain points, you need to change up your skill rotation to match that, so that it actually makes sense. So first up, we have Storm Maul with a 20% critical hit rate on it. Again, this is so that with our Death Blow set, we're achieving maximum critical hit rate when we have it on just a 20%, and it allows us to not have to worry about keeping the 30% up out of the tier 3 skills from Dragon Blood. So we can literally start right off with Storm Maul. You could potentially lead at the very beginning of your pack with a Doombringer at the start of your skill rotation, and in that instance, you could actually put the 30% critical hit rate there. But I wouldn't necessarily focus on having to do that unless you, for some reason, don't have the Death Blow set, or maybe you're trying to get it. Maybe blades are sold out on the market on your server, what have you. Then you may need to supplement the very beginning of your rotation, starting off with the Doombringer as opposed to the Storm Maul. That'll work okay, so that you can still Doombringer where you're supposed to at the swap over before Sundering Roar. So anyways, we're assuming you have your Death Blow set. We're going to run 20% critical hit rate and get some attack speed on our Storm Maul. Next up is going to be Aerial Burst. This skill has a DP debuff on it. Pretty standard to just stack those up. Since we're just using the last hit for it, it has a pretty decent AoE so that it is hitting all of the mobs. So we're going to get the 20 off the skill itself with an additional minus 15 DP. You'll see that I have a minus 4% evasion rate put on that. That's because if we're using a skill that we want to hit the group of mobs already for the DP debuff, then it's likely we're going to hit them with that evasion minus rate. This is really important, more so for like Hex Sanctuary. Having that, you could modify that into something else that suits you better if you're at a lower grind spot and your accuracy is totally fine. But it definitely helps out at the higher end spots that have some pretty decent accuracy requirements, especially the Rift bosses at Hex. They have some pretty high evasion, so picking up the extra hit rate where you can is definitely going to help out. Then we just have Spiteful Soul. It's giving us the 20 monster damage here, and then attack speed plus 7% just to get us a little bit of a refresh on that. It's likely that your other one is going to be down by then or just about to end, so we're going to get a refresh to finish up Spiteful Soul, and then Tectonic Slam comes right after that, so that we've got our attack speed up 24/7 on that one. Once those have finished, we go into our Doombringer, and this is where the damage is really going to start getting dumped in. Again, like I said, you could put this at the beginning of your Storm Maul and potentially with a critical hit rate 30%. Your mileage may vary on what you need out of that, so pay attention to how that is. But since we don't, we definitely want the 10% attack speed. We're going to get 30 monster damage on Doombringer as well. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's attacking as fast as possible, really important in Dragon Blood, especially, and then more monster damage is just always a really good thing. And then we go into Sundering Roar, and as I mentioned, positioning for this Sundering Roar and your Hexblood Sundering Roar are really important, but this one more so because we have that back attack plus 5% and critical hit damage plus 5%. Now, what you're going to notice about it is since it's only 5 seconds, this doesn't really carry over into other skills, so we're not really trying to set up those to buff other skill damage for it. We're just trying to maximize the Sundering Roar hits. If you put this setup on your Sundering Roar and you make sure you're landing back attacks when you set up that Sundering Roar, you're going to see absolutely massive damage come out of this thing with these extra modifiers added in. It is really, really, really nice. Lastly, we have Tectonic Slam. This one is kind of up to you. You could morph this. You could even put it on a different skill if you wanted to. This one is kind of subjective, and I use this based on how I grind specifically. Number one, we have an all accuracy rate plus 4% put on here. This keeps it so that accuracy rate is mostly up throughout the rest of the Hexblood skills, because that's the last skill we use in Dragon Blood as we do the skill rotation and work our way back to the top. So we have that accuracy rate buff coming around. It's going to also match up with tip of the scale out of Hexblood, so we've got a nice hit rate bonus across the board. You may not need that depending on where you're grinding, so kind of pay attention to that. And then out of this one, since I typically clear the mob pack either on this skill or just before or right around it, I like to have that movement speed up for my next pack where I'm starting off with my Hexblood skills. That movement speed zipping through using like Storm Maul and the Dragon Walk cancels and things that we have right at the beginning of our Hexblood rotation. It feels really nice having an extra movement speed doing those. They flow together a little nicely, especially the Dragon Walk cancels that we use going into like Aerial Burst. You'll see a pretty nice impact on that. Is it required? No. Is it super impactful? No. You could definitely take that out. This one's just more of like a preference and not necessarily maximizing damage. You can swap it out for another skill if you're comfortable with that, or even keep that same skill that might want to set you up for your Hexblood skills immediately after. Maybe you want to move your critical hit rate off the Storm Maul, which we lead with, and put it on Tectonic Slam, put something else on Storm Maul. You can definitely do that. Personally, I just like the Tectonic Slam movement speed, having that added bonus to help us with our Dragon Walk. So there you have it. That is a breakdown for our build, our rotation, and then the add-ons to match that rotation. Do want to reiterate again, if change these up for what's going to work for you. This is what works for me. As far as performance on this, at my AP, I can pretty much match what I do on my Succession DK, 312, 314, 408. Pretty much match what I can do on Succession DK at Gyfin, doing 14 to 15K in like full sweat mode hours. And then at Hex, I fall a little bit short. I can do push the 15K upwards on Succession DK, and I can push 14-ish on a full sweaty mode hour on Awakened Drax, so falls a little bit below there. As far as Awakened DK, some spots it's more like a mid A to high A plus, and there's actually a few spots like Gyfin, for instance, where it's like S minus tier. So Awakened Drax falling into that category, a little worse. Like I said at the beginning of the video, overall probably about an A minus. Real low A, and then in some spots like Gyfin, it actually does insanely well, approaching that S tier, because mostly because your Sundering Roar ends up being on off cooldown every single time, just because of the way the Gyfin mechanics work on those mob wake ups. So there you have it for everything. If you guys have any questions or anything, let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to go ahead and end the video with a few segments of me just grinding at Gyfin and kind of give you an idea of the skill rotation being used in action, so you can take a look at that. And other than that, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to like it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get notifications when new videos do go live. And if you'd like to catch me playing live, there's a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. You can jump on over there, drop a follow, so you get notifications for that as well. With that said, that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.